We welcome our new AI overlords. The latest from podnews.net with Libsyn. Stop dreaming, start podcasting. Podcast listeners are comfortable with AI tools being used in podcasting, says a new study from Acast. Uses of AI most welcomed by listeners include sound enhancements, translated captions, and AI-generated transcripts. The study claims that 79% of podcast listeners want transcripts for searching, and 78% want closed captions. You know, Acast already produces transcripts for its conversational targeting product. It could include those transcripts in its podcast feeds using the podcast transcript tag, which could also enable closed captions in supported players. I am so bored reading this stuff. Isn't there a human to take over for me now?
Why, yes there is. Joanna from Amazon Polly there. Thought the days of exclusive shows were over. If they are, nobody's yet told Audible, who have just announced a sci-fi comedy original called Third Eye, starring Neil Gaiman, Will Wheaton and many others. It's out in October. Buzzsprout has published its platform stats for June. Apple Podcast downloads are up nearly 2% month on month. The core audience for podcasts are men aged 25 to 34, says Edison Research. They spend 16% of their total audio time with the medium. However, podcasting does worst with men aged 55 to 64. They spend 4 times less time. The Paris Podcast Festival's competition is looking for entries. You have until July the 17th to enter your podcast. There are 7 categories. The Canada Podcast Ranker for May was released at the end of last week by Triton Digital. For sales networks, Amazon's Wondery network overtook CBC and Radio-Canada to reach second place, behind the SiriusXM podcast network. It lists participating publishers only. In South Korea, CBS, the Christian Broadcasting System, has signed with Triton Digital for podcast distribution, monetization and analytics. And in May 2018, Apple Podcasts requested that all podcast feeds should be secure, and that in future a secure feed would be required for analytics and to submit new podcasts. It's still not a requirement, but as of today, data from the Podcast Index suggests just 3.8% of the 4.1 million shows available are not served using a secure feed. In 2018, that figure was 83%. And if you're on Blue Sky Social, we are too. We're at podnews.net, or on Mastodon. Just search for updates at podnews.net to find us there. We're also on the Blue Bird site when it works. And in podcast news, from Ireland, Real Lives Untold is a brand new true crime and human interest podcast that aims to create a space for people from all walks of life to tell their stories, raise awareness on a variety of topics, and help others in similar situations. It started in May and has now signed with the Acast Creator Network. Councilcast features the podcast lawyer Gordon Firemark in a new episode this week. He talks copyright, trademarks, release agreements, and how to disclose podcast ads on your show. Reaching Your Goals is celebrating more than 100,000 downloads since launching in January this year. Joanna Herbst features exciting interviews with business leaders, academics, coaches, or entrepreneurs. Getty Art and Ideas has launched Art and Poetry, a 3-part miniseries. And if you're travelling at the end of a long weekend and you need some inspo, then New Podcast Trailers is there for you. You can find that at podnews.net/trailers. This podcast is sponsored by Libsyn. Are you ready to tell your story? Libsyn has an all-in-one, fast, easy podcast tool that allows you to plan, record and create your podcast today. Stop dreaming, start podcasting with Libsyn at libsyn.com. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.